Welcome to Rates and Barrels. It is Tuesday, June 20th. Derek Van Riper, Eno Saris, Chris Welsh, all here. It's Project Prospect. On this episode, we have breaking news of another prospect coming up this week. We have promotions that have happened since we last spoke. We have a new set of Dynasty rankings up on The Athletic from Mr. Chris Welsh. So we'll talk about a few big movers on that list. We had some mailbag questions about players that have been demoted to AAA this year and what they've been doing while they're down there and what the future might look like for them. So a lot of ground to cover. And gentlemen, as we got started today, we learned that Gavin Williams is the latest prospect who's going to come up and make a big league debut. Wednesday appears to be the day for the Guardians as they continue to push chips in for this season. And this is exciting because they've already brought up Tanner Bybee. They've already brought up Logan Allen. Both Bybee and Allen are very good young pitchers, and there's a very good chance that Gavin Williams could be the best of that entire trio. So we have one more excellent young pitcher on the way in Cleveland. Welsh, I'll start with you. Expectations for Williams relative to this amazing rookie class of pitchers that just keeps growing by the week.
Pretty high. That's the little unfortunate thing is like, how do we not have really, really high expectations for any of these guys at this point? I mean, even, Brian Wu is coming up and getting big strikeout numbers and performing well, not to undertake his value or anything like that, but preseason conversation, Brian Wu wasn't at the top of the list of the pitchers that we were losing our minds about. But I think we're in a pretty high spot, though. I think we do come back to the same conversation we always do about what type of innings, on the heels of Yuri Perez, and actually Yuri Perez staying in the rotation, how much of a run can he get? Well, in 115 innings he pitched last year between two levels. He's right around 60 this year. So if we're giving more, there's actually a pretty decent chance that Gavin Williams is going to be able to stick around and be significant in that rotation. Gavin Williams has got a great fastball. He's got a good slider, a good curveball. He can get the changeup in there, big strikeout option. He hasn't been going crazy deep into games, but he moved off a AA to AAA pretty quickly here. And the strikeouts, walks, they've been a little bit adjusting, but over his last 5 starts, 4 of the 5, he's gone at least 5 innings. So I got pretty big expectations because I think he's going to pound the zone. I think he's going to rack up some strikeouts. I hope he can go deep into games, but I think Gavin Williams instantly jumps into that upper echelon tier of the Taj Bradleys, the Yuri Perez's as far as talent goes. And arguably, I guess I'd have to go back and look. I think he might have the most innings pitched last year of any of these guys. It's over 115, at least this top crew of players. Obviously, the failed Brandon Pfaadt had a whole bunch more innings, but Gavin Williams got a significant chance to put up some big innings this year, and he belongs at the top of the heap. And I'm very excited to hear what Eno is going to spout to us on some Stuff Plus and everything, because I'm pretty stoked about this. And this needed to be a preemptive move, by the way. So God willing, if you are going to get into the pool now, but I definitely been trying to preach it. If you were able to get in early, this felt like it was coming, especially after the McKenzie injury. So hopefully you did. But what say you, Eno?
Minimum 150 pitches and 50 pitches per appearance in AAA this year. It goes Bobby Miller, Tyler Glasnow, Gavin Williams by Stuff Plus. Being anywhere in the conversation with Tyler Glasnow and Stuff Plus is a good place. Per pitch, the fastball looks outstanding. The slider looks above average. The changeup, he only threw 36 in the last sample that I have of the changeup, but it had 131 Stuff Plus. So also some pretty poor command numbers. So I guess what we would see is more fastball, sliders, and curves, and only the occasional change when he's ahead, maybe in 2-strike counts to lefties or whatever. So I doubt we'll see a ton of changeups with that command number on it, but it's nice to know that he has a high stuff change that'll be in his back pocket. But one of the reasons that I like him is that I'm trending towards having more confidence in the fastball Stuff Plus number and more confidence in pitchers with good fastballs in the beginning of their careers. So, Bryce Miller is obviously someone who's a little bit flawed, in terms of his secondaries and how fastball heavy he is. Taj Bradley, his secondaries don't leap off the page, at least by Stuff Plus. He's a fastball first guy. Bobby Miller is in some ways a fastball first guy. All these guys have had really good success. If you have a really great fastball, the rest of it will fall into place, I think. And so I'm pretty excited for it.
And also, and just throwing in his last start he had on the 14th, he was 60% fastball with a 20% whiff rate, 23% CSW, 20% slider, much worse whiff rate, but a good 29% CSW, curveball 17% of the time, and then just threw in a couple occasional changeups. Best strikeout pitch was his curveball in that last outing with the best CSW percentage. So it was primary fastball, but a 37% usage between the slider and the curveball, which are two solid, if not, plus pitches, especially the slider in there. So big fastball, as long as the command is there with the secondaries. I don't know what side we're going to get. Are we going to get the 8-9 strikeout, Brian Wu type of thing? Or are we going to get an efficient Emmet Sheehan type of performance where the strikeouts are down because he's trying to be efficient? Either way, this is a top guy, good stuff plus, and those numbers look good.
I'm excited about it because it's the debut against the A's. The A's offense hasn't been as bad as some of us expected coming to the season, but it's a nice soft landing spot for that Gavin Williams debut. Good opportunity for the Guardians to put a little extra pressure on the Twins as they enter Tuesday. Just 2 games back in the AL Central. Twins 1 game below 500. I love that the Guardians are finally bringing Bo Naylor back into the fold too. They DFA'd Mike Zunino last week. Naylor's back in the equation. I think there's a chance Naylor can be at least the 2/3 share starter behind the plate, maybe even a tick more than that. The numbers at AAA going back to last season were excellent. This is a guy that really kind of put himself back on the map with what he did in 2022. He opened last season at AA, ended up finishing the year with a longer run in Columbus, spent almost as much time there this year. 28 combined home runs at AAA between this year and last year. 11 for 14 as a base stealer, good OBPs. I think he's the kind of player that is going to be a little bit light in batting average. It's a lot of fly balls, so there's going to be some downside there, but he was doing enough damage when he put it in the air to where I think you could see a pretty good floor right away. So I think Naylor actually has relevance in single catcher leagues because I think the playing time is actually going to be enough for him to make a dent right away. He's right on the outside of the top 10.
Like 15 team league, or would you even go to 12? Because I'm not so sure. I mean, I see where you're going with that because that's like a big like EVs, and you get the ball in the air with big. I mean, those Naylor kids are built different. Josh, their brother Miles, I should be seeing tomorrow at the MLB Draft Combine when I go. I believe he's here. I mean, they are built different. So I think the recipe works well. Plus, really good walk percentages, but. I mean, is that a tough nut to crack to get into the top 15? Like, who are those bottom catchers that you would rather speculate on Naylor over?
Yes, if you're looking right now, if you're sitting there with someone who shares a role, Travis d'Arnaud shares a lot of time, right? So I think Naylor versus d'Arnaud becomes interesting. Alejandro Kirk's on the IL now. He's having a down year. He's probably going to come up in our dynasty movers as a faller for this year. Keibert Ruiz, if you're trying to squeeze value out of him, he'll play a lot more than Naylor or can play a lot more than Naylor. But I think the skills here play up quite a bit. And I'm always willing to take a little less playing time behind the plate if I can get that boost in skills. And I think with Naylor, the lines are at that point where that's a gamble we're taking.
Also, we have to probably acknowledge that part of this move has got to be about the inefficiency in that Cleveland offense. I mean, like it is Ramirez, and then you cross your finger, and Naylor has kind of been good, but like you got to pray that Andres Jimenez is doing something, or Rosario,
and it's missing power.
Exactly, it's like it's missing impactful offense, and the power has been pretty deficient. That this is like a clear move. This is a clear move for them to get more power built into that lineup. So to your point, he might get more playing time than we acknowledge. I've seen him play other positions. I kind of wonder if they don't think they need to here, if they would at some point even experiment getting him in some other spots as far as making sure playing time is there. But okay, yeah, you know what? Those names you mentioned, it's probably a pretty good case why he could be in a 15.
The thing that fascinates me about Naylor is that I don't have a good sense of how much he'll strike out, and neither do the projection systems. He ranges from 24% to 30% strikeout rate, and I don't know. Normally, even with prospects, I feel like we see a more narrow band between those things. That's like 24% is, that's a guy who could hit 260, 270, if he if he hits the ball hard and is fast enough to take advantage of that. 30%, you see that Zips projection of a 207 batting average, and you understand there's 30% strikeout rate. And looking through his minor league stops, like his first stop at Double-A, 31.5% strikeout rate with a 12.8 swing strike rate. Since then, it's been a lot better, and the swinging strike rate has been a lot better. So I'm assuming that most of these projection systems put swinging strike rate in as a feature in their projection systems. But I would also assume that certain projections weigh that more heavily than others. Because that's, I think, one of the big sources of the difference here. If you look at post 2021, Naylor has kept his swinging strike rate under 10%. And his strikeout rate has been closer to 22% overall. So, that's the thing I'm watching most of all, because I think the difference between 30% and 24% is 30% is he's one of those catchers.
One of those guys.
One of those guys who's going to hit 225, maybe hit you 18 homers. I don't know. He just is just a guy. But at 24%, that's a big difference.
I wonder, and this is probably going to be a transition that I'm stealing, but I think this question of Bo Naylor is also maybe tied to Henry Davis, who made his debut, and he's going to qualify obviously as a catcher, though he's coming up and he's going to play right field. And Henry Davis has always had this really interesting profile because he steals bases. He's a raw power guy, like gloveless, back in the Louisville days. I mean, he can absolutely crank homers out. He definitely has a swing and miss issue that, kind of to your point, I kind of agree with you. Like, I tend to side that Bo Naylor is going to have more of a strikeout problem, but it's maybe positively inconsistent. Like, you don't really have a great gauge. I do have a gauge that, like, Henry Davis is going to be like a 25% strikeout type of guy. He'll walk some, but he's got great power. He also can steal. He's going to play more now that he's getting some added versatility. So I lean, if I was asking me, Henry Davis versus Bo Naylor.
Who's going to strike out more?
I'm going to lean that I want to bet on Henry Davis for the rest of the year, because I think categorically he might add a little bit more. I think the strikeouts could be similar, and he just, with the position flexibility, if I'm in that 15 team and I'm moving off of a Travis d'Arnaud and it's, hey, which one do I pick? I think I'm going to go with Henry Davis over Bo Naylor, but I don't know if you guys feel different about it.
Yeah, I think I'm with you on Davis over Naylor. I think just the fact that he debuted in right field, that gives you that extra wide range for playing time that kind of puts them in there as a possible everyday guy. That's an edge. I think I trust the power even a tick more with Davis than I do with Naylor. The swing and miss concerns seem somewhat equal in the short term. If you're talking keeper and dynasty,
Davis's swing
that's a totally
rates
different
have been
conversation.
pretty up and down. Like,
Some
there's not
injuries,
as much of a pattern for Naylor. Davis is, 2023 Double-A 7%, 2023 Triple-A 10.9% swinging strike rate. So it's a little bit up and down. Strikeout rate is like one of those things that I think is super important and really hard to know ahead of time.
Yeah, I was looking back at some of the best rookie catcher performances from the last 5 seasons or so. Not surprisingly, Adley Rutschman last year, just in terms of volume of playing time and overall value, that's the best rookie catching performance we've seen since 2018. It's not even
normally
that close.
I'm out on them. I mean, catchers debut later, their offense peaks later. Like, they're normally bad picks, but Rutschman has been against that rule.
I think
his swing strike rates were very good in the minor leagues, especially for a catcher.
Yeah, very, very polished hitter as he came into the league. I mean, we're seeing it with Francisco Alvarez right now. Alvarez is providing a lot of value, but it's coming with the swing and miss that we thought could be a concern. It's, in the end, good at the position, and it's a flawed performance that will need to change over time if Francisco Alvarez is going to reach his true talent ceiling, right? But given his age, it seems like it's still a profile you'd be more likely to bet on than not. But I would choose Davis over Naylor if I was in a single catcher league scenario trying to decide which one's more valuable. I think the way they're being used initially is part of the reason why. And I think Davis, from just a pure hitting perspective, has that higher ceiling. I think that's been the case since we found out who each of these guys was. Like, that's the truth the entire time.
Do you feel different? Do you feel, because I feel like you were wavering of like maybe the strikeout issues are not as much of a problem with Bo Naylor. Maybe you feel more confident in Naylor.
Yeah, I would say that I might feel less confident than consensus on both of these guys.
Okay, yeah, that's fair. That's fair on both of these guys.
It's funny to have a 70 power guy, and then the best max EV we have on record is 109, a 70 raw power for Henry Davis, but it's 49 plate appearances, so could just be,
he's an interesting talent.
Chance yet.
Yeah, in the AFL, I mean, he's a scrappy catcher guy too.
55% pull rates for Henry Davis. Holy moly!
See, I wonder when you see something extreme like that for a player that you don't really expect to do that in the long run, how much of that is Henry Davis just trying to like mash his way through the minor leagues as quickly as possible? Just saying like, hey, the best thing I can do is hit homers. If I hit homers, I'm going to move through quicker. I'll show the rest of my approach later when I have to. But now I'm just going to foot on the gas, try to yank everything. Or is it a problem?
He hit 207 in Double-A last year with a 54% pull rate.
See, I didn't see that in the AFL, and I watched a decent amount of Henry Davis. I didn't see really intense. I actually saw him going center field a decent amount. I should probably go back and look at some of the video. I felt like it was more contact approach than it was, because you get some guys like he was on a team. I think he was on the same team with like Hylan Ortiz with the Phillies, and that's a guy that is like monster pull, bat flip, hit it 450 feet type of guy, where Henry Davis had a much more concerted approach. And I was saying like kind of a scrappy catcher, like he definitely got hit a whole bunch. He would kind of lean into a pitch, and I saw a lot more of.
So is he a guy who crowds the plate and tries to pull even pitches that are out over the plate?
Yeah, and he's got kind of like a lower in stance too, and he's just kind of a bully on the ball. But I saw him going up the field a decent amount, and maybe that was part of just pitch recognition and becoming a better hitter. And hilariously, he's doing the thing that we thought Endy Rodriguez was going to do. And I think you started this. Yeah, you started the season.
Well, I think delay has meant a lot to that organization. I think Jason Delay.
Jason Delay. I was like, what, delaying service time? What do you mean?
No, just I don't think he's necessarily as good as he is right now, but I think that he's a quality, he's just like a major league catcher, like he's fine.
Well, but the unique thing is like, okay, you have that. Does this mean that they are going to build Endy Rodriguez as the catcher, and they're already making the move for Henry Davis to be out there? Like what? Because the bet would have been Endy Rodriguez comes up, he's the catcher, or he's the guy that's going to move around the field, but he comes up first, and then Henry Davis follows behind and is maybe the secondary catcher. And now Henry Davis has jumped over him because of some of the struggles, and he's not even in that catcher spot. I guess I'm just talking into the clouds of like, I just don't know what
I think this
is
a sign.
Davis.
I think this is a sign that Endy Rodriguez is catching well in the minor leagues right now.
And then he's the guy, and it'll be Delay and him.
The next catcher. Yeah.
And Henry Davis can play as the third
Isn't
catcher.
It? I mean, the first day that Henry Davis played in the big leagues, he played in the outfield.
Yeah.
Yeah, they could play him at first base eventually too. I mean, Carlos Santana is there on a 1-year deal. He's 37 years old. That spot is wide open. Davis should hit enough to take that spot. We did have a mailbag question about Endy Rodriguez. Short term, I don't think it changes a whole lot for him. He had that wrist injury earlier in the year at AAA. It's looking at the numbers, you sort of wonder if he's all the way back from that or if he's got some lingering effects of that. Long term, he's going to play in the big leagues because of his versatility. He's very athletic, so there's still a lot to like there. It almost seems like a relative buy low opportunity. We're kind of in that mid-season point where people are shuffling rosters in long-term leagues. Endy Rodriguez is more the kind of player I'd want to be getting back in a trade than somebody I'd be trying to trade away right now.
Yeah, low strikeout rate, still walking.
It was a good catch on the Carlos Santana thing. I think it's he's a possible DFA candidate.
They just get out and Henry goes to first.
Right now he's above. He's a 108 WRC plus against lefties, and I think that's probably keeping him on the roster. But it's mostly BABIP, and it has and fewer strikeouts. But he still has a 127 ISO against lefties and a 108 WRC plus for Carlos Santana against as a first baseman against one-handedness and below average against the other. That's pretty borderline. You know what I'm saying? So if they ever sort of youth movement or whatever, like 1 year deal, veteran, let him go and see if he can jump on somewhere else. I don't know. I could see Henry Davis being the starting first baseman by the end of the season, I guess.
Yeah, it's definitely possible. Santana hasn't shown enough to guarantee that he keeps that roster spot all season. Couple hard hit balls in that debut from Henry Davis on Monday night. Got his first big league hit, drew a walk. A little weird to see him hitting behind Connor Joe and Santana and Ke'Bryan Hayes and Rodolfo Castro. Some teams break players in that way. I don't expect that to last long. I think
not everybody's the Reds DVR. They can't all hit 2 to come up to the majors.
The high level concept. Really high level concept to have, the guy you brought up who's better than the guys that have been on your roster to hit him higher in the order and try to max out those plate appearances. But hey, what can you do? Let's get to Emmet Sheehan. 6 no-hit innings in his big league debut on Friday against the Giants. My nitpicking jerk footnote, only 3 strikeouts, only 4 swinging strikes. I think that's probably the bigger concern. That Giants lineup getting better, getting healthier, tougher matchup than it was earlier on this season. We saw the 4-seamer, we saw a changeup, we saw a slider, heavy 4-seamer usage, almost 70%, maxed out at 98.1, averaged 95.8 on that pitch. The changeup through 17% of the time, slider 15% of the time. The CSW easily the best on the slider at 31% in the debut. So for a guy that was just destroying the minor leagues, what were your first impressions of Emmet Sheehan in the big leagues,
He's funky. He releases it from a low spot. So if you look at something like Brooks Baseball and you see he only has 8 inches of vertical movement, that doesn't capture all of Emmet Sheehan's.
It's from like here. Almost.
Yeah, it's a for example, it's 6 inches lower release point than Bobby Miller, but the same amount of Brooks Baseball vertical movement. But when you look at a stat called IVB, which is what is the I actually? It's
inverted vertical, isn't it?
Inverted vertical break, right?
Yeah, inverted vertical break.
Inverted is the I?
I believe so.
Or imputed? Any case, that vertical break does include a sense of where the release point is. So I was hoping to go on, if you want a place to look that up, Alex Chamberlain's pitch leaderboards has IVB. That's the best place to find that. And he doesn't have Sheehan in there for some reason. I don't know why. So anyway, I found a reference saying that Sheehan has 18 inches of IVB, where I know that Bobby Miller has more like 16 inches. And that's what a 6 inches of release point difference can be. You know what I mean? So even though, like, by one metric, they have the same amount of vertical movement, because Sheehan is releasing it 6 inches lower, it hits a different angle. You can just imagine that in your head. If these two have, like, same raw movement, but one's coming from here, it's going to be like this, and one's coming here, it's going to be more like that. So the plane changes. So he's very interesting plane. If he does in fact have 18 inches of IVB, then that's a benchmark for success in this league right now. He also pairs that with great horizontal movement. So like Bobby Miller, he has this 2-plane fastball, but unlike Bobby Miller, his vertical aspect of it plays up. We have it with the 105 Stuff Plus number on Fangraphs. I do know from Jeff Ponce that it's more like a 130 in some team models. I think it's a really good fastball. And I could see somebody with a really good fastball like that not having a ton of whiffs. And so, I could see this. I could see Sheehan not being as good as he was hyped to be. Sorry, I have to say it that way. I don't know how else to say it, because the secondary stuff doesn't pop as much in our model. We didn't see the whiffs, so I think it's a good fastball, but I might take Bryce Miller over him. I didn't mean to sort of wade into hot takery land. I know that in some places that's blasphemy what I just said.
I won't say said player's name to give DVR the credit to put the counter at 2 that he put on the scroll bar earlier. But there's another pitcher that has a very similar,
You're going to talk about Brandon Pfaadt again?
No, but there's just another pitcher in the minors that sounds very much like. I will not say his name. Not to get into the weeds, to make you get into the weeds or anything, but that 105 versus 130, is that about the pitch designation? We kind of talked about this off air, and there's a Twitter thing about it. It's not It's not about.
In fact, if you look on Fangraphs right now, there is no number for the fastball because it's the same number. It's 105, but they reclassified it from a sinker to a four seam. And they, I mean MLBIM. And so that's just caused some technical difficulties inside the relationship between our numbers and Fangraphs picking them up. It's like it's a technical thing. It's not anything else. And
just so people know,
there was some discussion about whether or not it would be a big deal if the fastball and the sinker, if it changed stuff plus numbers, if it was a four seam instead of a sinker, called a four seam versus a sinker. It did not. It's 105 either way. 105 is still like a pretty decent number for a four seam fastball. Let me see if I can get some full season comps on this. A 105 from a starter, a 105 four seam fastball puts him, next to just behind Mitch Keller and ahead of Hunter Brown. That's pretty good.
That's a great group.
But we have a 93 stuff plus on the slider. So, if you're wondering why there weren't more whiffs, it may not actually be about the fastball.
Yeah, I want to see more. Like one of the things, when you look at the chart, he definitely lived up in the zone a whole lot in this game. And like, it's good to be in the upper tiers of the zone, especially with a fastball that has got that IVB and has got kind of the release point. Like, you're going to be able to get more strikeouts than maybe your stuff provides. But also, like, I do feel like when I look at this, it's a lot in the upper zone, and I feel like that could cause some troubles.
Or whatever.
Yeah, well, if you're throwing, I mean, his changeup was hitting in the upper tier, not a lot of strikes. His slider was sitting up in the zone. His fastball, the heat map is heavy in the upper tier of the zone. That once there's a little bit more view on it, is he going to get hit up and how he adjusts?
And then, sorry.
Yeah, no, and it's just like I hear you talking about the numbers on stuff. I feel like this is one of those, and I'd be curious, even in your own take on this, is like, I feel like I need a couple starts to really have a gauge on this, because we saw what Bryce Miller did early on, and then where some of the struggles came fairly enough against the Yankees and the Rangers. And if he's going to be a heavy fastball guy, how do the secondaries play up when guys start attacking the upper part of the zone where he's throwing pretty much all his pitches?
I think it's always better if, like Spencer Strider, if you're able to command the fastball to two different places. If you can get keyholed, anybody can start to have some strategy against you. And so if he's just living up in the zone, that's going to be interesting. Is that just, and then the last way that this kind of comes together is we've seen that the numbers on sweepers have improved towards the batters over time. So the sweeper became very popular, and every year the batters get a little bit better at it. Now what we're seeing is, Lance Brosnowski had this, batters against 18 IVB. It used to be 18 was the gold standard. And if you had 18 inches of IVB, you had a fastball that people couldn't hit. Well, guess what happens? The league starts creeping up there. Now there's more guys with 17 and 18. And Lance found that league batter production against pitches with more than 18 IVB and 95 miles an hour has gone up every year in the last 3 years. So the same thing's happening where we had this shiny toy and everyone's like, oh, we got to have a high IVB, get the spin efficiency, top of the zone. And batter's like, man, all I see are these like high riding fastballs, top of the zone. What do you think a batter's going to do? Train to hit that. So
adjust. Wow.
The league trains the batters in a way, and so what can happen with a minor leaguer is they're facing minor leaguers who aren't training in the same way or aren't as good as the major leaguers. And then they get to the major leagues and the major league is like, oh, this guy's got another 18 IVB fastball. Like, I know how to do this. The flip side of that, of course, is that Sheehan does have more wiggle, side to side wiggle than a lot of those guys. So it could still be a unique fastball. It could still be a very good fastball, but
And I do want to point out the
it's not
hilariousness
alone.
of,
It's not unique.
yeah, and this is a funny conversation too, because this is like classic, anyone that analyzes baseball, because we're also talking about a guy that had 6 no-hit innings in his major league debut. Like we're breaking down, like we're breaking down the IVB and the release point and everything, and he didn't strike
And where
out
were the
10.
whiffs? Where were the whiffs?
Where are the strikeouts? He didn't know whiffs, and he had 6 no-hit innings. So it's like I do want to acknowledge that, because I've been a loud proponent of Emmet Sheehan pretty much for the entire year after seeing him last season, and I love seeing this. But there definitely is something in the back of my mind, and it's rotted out from this season of prospects, that we've seen so many of these prospects come up. We've seen the waves. We've also seen the 60+% fastball prospects that come up, and we've seen the failures that have happened and how do they adjust. I will say I do trust the Dodgers in being able to maintain this and help find the adjustments overall. And that's an incredible debut for Emmet Sheehan. So anybody that picked up, this is a great get that you had. But it's interesting how you said, like, you'll take Bryce Miller rest of season, because that is what this is going to come to ultimately outside of this incredible debut.
Yeah, we'll see. I mean, it's pretty interesting, and also, I think it was on Alex Fast's podcast where we broke down Bobby Miller, and we were talking about whether you could like tell a pitcher came from a certain organization just by his arsenal or something. Mm-hmm. And I was like, I don't think the Dodgers have a type. I think that if you look at Stone, Grove, Josiah Gray, any of those guys that have come through, they seem very different, and it's hard to put a type on it. I will say, looking at the raw Brooks numbers for Bobby Miller and Emmet Sheehan is interesting. They both, in certain ways, have a similar 2-plane fastball. And so I wonder if there's something going on in LA where they're like, let's not just have the IVB, let's have a 2-plane situation. So I wonder if there is now a sort of Dodger approach to the fastball.
Interesting.
Yeah, it's interesting too. I think we said earlier, IVB, it's induced vertical break.
Induced, that's it. And that's why it's important. It's induced because it's relative to your release point. So it's like induced, so it has it has a better anchor. The other one is just sort of like movement versus a spinless pitch, which is always hard to explain and kind of problematic.
Someone was totally like yelling at us, and I hope that person couldn't hold it in, and they had to make that like sarcastic tweet of like, "Oh, it's this," and then they come to it and they're like, "Ah, crap, you guys did."
We got there eventually.
We got you. We got back there.
I knew it was something else. I thought it was imputed, which is similar to induced.
I think it's funny that we all actually knew, but we all got it wrong, and we're all convinced we were right while getting it wrong.
I wasn't convinced.
I was like,
pretty embarrassed that I got it wrong, but you just use IVB all the time. I didn't even think about it too much.
No, yeah,
we use URL a lot, but can either of you got what's a URL?
What is URL? It's protocol. No, it's not.
Universal relative location.
Yeah, I didn't actually look it up because I don't remember what it is either. Uniform Resource Locator.
Yeah, I didn't feel confident.
I totally knew that.
Emmet Sheehan looks like will pitch next on Friday. They have 2 off days. Dodgers have Monday and Thursday off this week, and Monday off next week. If he stays in the rotation beyond that, a trip to Coors awaits next week. Ooh. So, yeah, even if you really like Emmet Sheehan, probably gonna be careful with them in weekly leagues for that particular matchup. Let's get to some Dynasty League movers. A new set of rankings went up on the site on Tuesday morning from Welsh, and I've dug into this a bit, and I've had a chance to pull a bunch of names that have moved up significantly. Now, the young players who are much higher near the top of the list that are of note, probably Wander Franco and Corbin Carroll. I mean, look at where they are today. They've really kind of hit that stride to the point where they are among the absolute elite players in Dynasty leagues. Carroll sitting up there at 5, Wander at number 6 overall on the list. When you get into that tier, when you're in the Shohei, Acuna, Tatis, Julio Rodriguez, Juan Soto stratosphere, you've made it. There is nowhere else to go. So,
yeah,
as you go through these updates, not just for those 2 players, but as the middle of the season, this seems like a better time, a more fun time to actually go through this process than in the first 4 to 6 weeks of the season when you want to make big adjustments, but we just haven't seen enough, especially when we're looking at a multi-year view.
Oh, I'm a total, like, I have to characterize everything beforehand. I have to, or, contextualize everything when I tell people. I'm like, all right, it's early in the season. When I do my prospects or dynasty, I'm always contextualizing stuff. I do it in this article as well. As I mentioned, actually, I don't even know if Brandon, when edited it, if he took out my, like, by the way, I don't hate your team, your favorite players, or you when I do this ranks. I want everyone to always know that. I don't hate you and your favorite players when you read this type of stuff. But to your point, I really dislike that first month because it's open for reactionary stuff, but it kind of is here too. Like, someone asked me this, someone had they tweeted me, something wasn't updating for them, and they're like, no Matt McLain love. And I went and looked, and I'm like, what are you talking about? I'm like, I have him like outside the top 100. I think that's actually pretty aggressive, especially where I had him. And it hadn't updated to the last update. But in my explanation to give them a little bit more, I said, I just need, before I make aggressive move, I need more than 30 games at the major leagues to be like, all right, Matt McLain is, a top 50 player. Kind of the same thing with Josh Lowe. I actually think Josh Lowe might have been the most difficult player in that top 100 range to battle with, because how he's performed. I did a rest of season mock draft like 2 weeks ago. And the conversation came up, does Josh Lowe belong in the second round? We did 2 rounds. Does he belong somewhere in that second round? You could argue it with what he's done on this year, but it has been primarily against righties. He's not, he's a splits guy, but he's absolutely freaking dominating on those splits. But what does that look like over an entire season when there's been struggles? So me personally, I found Josh Lowe to be maybe the most difficult in, do you give him a top 25 or 50 as a young guy with the Rays, or do you backtrack a little bit to get a little bit more? I did. I probably am less aggressive than maybe a few other people that do dynasty ranks, because I want to see a little bit more before we anoint Josh Lowe is the next big breakout. But yeah, the biggest changes were Corbin Carroll and Wander Franco. I'm actually very proud of the Wander Franco one, because I never really gave up. I think there was a big argument to be said that he could have been moved outside of anyone's top 50 in Dynasty for what happened last year. I didn't. I kept him in the 20s. He's now moved up to number 6, which is technically number 5. I just want to point out to people, because I have Shohei Ohtani at 1, assuming it's a daily transactional type of league. If it's not, I actually lay out in the article where they would go. But Wander Franco, 3rd in WAR in the league, 3rd in stolen bases, which is crazy. And I mean, Corbin Carroll speaks for himself. He's pacing out to be a 30-40 guy if he doesn't get better in the second half. Even if he tapers back a little bit, he looks like he's going to be a 34 guy, 2nd in WAR on the year. He's going to, without question, be able to step into 2030. And he's not Acuna, but, the Corbin Carroll versus Julio Rodriguez, Juan Soto's, those are all in question because of what Carroll's done. So those have been the 2 most impactful, but the hardest one was Josh Lowe, for sure.
Yeah, I would say Lowe makes a lot of sense. The guy that kind of had it click after a couple of opportunities. If a player like Jarren Duran went off for a half season, it'd be really hard to adjust his multi-year value based on the track record of up and down and kind of struggles to get to that point. Lowe, I think, is sort of similar, a little younger, if I'm not mistaken, but really tough player to evaluate for the rest of this season, for sure.
And I also, like how I do my dynasty, if people want to check and I put it in there, I envision a 3-year span, because I think anything over 3 years in dynasty is kind of tough to balance. And especially if I'm in a new dynasty, like they break apart and fall apart. So you'll see like veterans be higher, a little bit higher on mine, if I think they can produce over the 3 years. And that's also like, this is actually like a really tough time. It's like, are the rookies ready to take the big jump? Is a struggling veteran coming down? Guys like Austin Riley, who's not even like a crazy veteran, what level does he stay? There's a bunch of moves in there, but a majority of the ones I think you picked as far as the risers were younger guys establishing themselves more and building up more value.
Yeah, we talked about Christian Javier on the show maybe 3 or 4 weeks ago now. I think he's tough to evaluate from a long-term perspective. Is he? You could ask yourself, is he going through an adjustment phase right now where he's realizing that either he and the organization are going to realize he has to do something else between now and next season if he's going to remain a really effective starter in the long run? Or are we seeing him settle into the pitcher he's more likely to be in the long run? Like, how much of a finished product can we consider Christian Javier to be? And I think pitchers
How much
can
do we
change.
care about the already 1.3 mile an hour velocity loss and the fact that he has below average velocity right now?
Yeah, like that to me makes a player like that very, very difficult to evaluate for these long-term perspectives.
I don't think I moved him. I think I decided to not touch him, and maybe it's actually a little bit of cop-out. I didn't realize I did this, but I've got that trio of Astro starters like next to each other. Framber, I mean, I think Hunter Brown is phenomenally interesting, especially from a 3-year perspective. Framber, probably the most valuable of those, but the oldest as well. And Javier, I don't think I touched Javier or Framber, and I brought Hunter Brown up, and that's why it's like, let's take a little bit more sample size. Let's see what that materializes with Javier. Let's see how Brown continues to go. But, I think Javier looks like he might be the guy on the outs as far as like that 3 from a dynasty perspective of the rotation. Probably rather have Framber and Hunter Brown.
I also think it's funny when you consider pitchers from a dynasty league perspective, it's completely different than position players. Like, I don't care if a pitcher's 27 or 30, it doesn't matter as much to me because I think I take the same view you do, Welsh, where it's 3 years. If the stuff is good and we're at a point where they can maybe lose a little velo, or if I think they've got good enough command to work through it with a deeper arsenal, I'm okay with taking the chance on an air quotes older pitcher that other people might not be. And I think that, knowing that pitchers can also change, add stuff to their arsenal, Joe Ryan's a good example of this. I mean, Joe Ryan, I was thinking about what you were saying a little earlier, where you have guys in the minor leagues that maybe aren't prepared to hit a certain pitch type with the Emmet Sheehan fastball. I think the Joe Ryan fastball probably experienced that a little bit too, where the K rates we saw from Joe Ryan coming through the Rays system before he got traded to Minnesota were off the charts amazing, and no one expected him to carry that over. But I would guess the projections, relatively speaking, probably were too high on him for Ks compared to what he ended up doing. Like most guys that miss as many bats as Joe Ryan was missing probably come in with higher big league K rates. And that led to some skepticism about what he did upon arrival in 2021. And I was a little bit cautious with him in my keeper league coming off of last season. And he comes back this year with the new sweeper. It's like, well, that changes everything because he's not as dependent on that unique, good fastball, very good fastball. But I always thought if Joe Ryan's fastball lost a tick or a tick and a half, that things would unravel on him really fast. Having that sweeper, I have a much lower level of concern about that package completely dismantling.
It's still 92.5 with the fastball. I mean, I think your original concerns don't lose sight of them too much. But, just generally what I do like from your list is that you do have a pretty strong starting pitcher what's it called? Also just a discount. Like your number one starting pitcher is at 17, if you're not counting Shohei. And then you got a little pocket there, and then there's really not that many pitchers until you get into another pocket in the sort of early 40s, late 30s, early 40s. I mean, I'm guessing right now, but I'd say in your top 50, you have like 10 starting pitchers.
Oh yeah, I probably should have counted that. I think you're right.
I think you're right to do that. I'm not criticizing. I think that's.
You're
right
yeah.
Fact,
and I think that's
sometimes I look at it and wonder if it could be stronger. I mean, Strider, really sort of stands out as a young guy, velo, but 2-pitch pitcher. Could there be injury concerns? Would you really take Spencer Strider over Mookie Betts? I mean, yeah, I guess with Betts being older, yeah. I could see it, but
it's like, are you getting the new DeGrom type of stuff? Those are the questions. I mean, that's the same thing with like prospect ranking in general. Any fantasy ranking is pitching, though. The adage has always been like, oh, build up your hitters and get your pitchers later. It's easier said than done in leagues because when you're in a win now mode, pitchers are worth exponentially more than like what my list would represent. But if I'm in an evaluation state, I'm going to value hitters long-term over them. And there's some tough ones in there. A really tough one, coming back to the age thing, I actually would be really curious what you think about this, is where did I want to go with Sandy Alcantara, who's still young, versus where do I go with an older, almost 33 Kevin Gossman, who's been ridiculous. And Kevin Gossman is an example, I think, of what you were talking about, DVR, in that 3-year span. Who's a guy that can still produce? I've always used Freddie Freeman as my prime example of a guy who's older, who I just have high because I still think he's going to produce at elite levels for multiple years. Gossman is one of those, but like, with a 5-year age gap, who would you rather have if you're thinking in the short term, Gossman or Alcantara?
I think Gossman.
Yeah, that's tough. 5 years, sans 5 years for Gossman over Alcantara right now. And I don't think like the thought of that in Dynasty for people, I think breaks their brain. Why you would take a 5-year older pitcher for a guy like Sandy, who's had, you could argue, 2 really bad months coming off of what was incredible. But it's worrisome.
I think we've seen some decent aging curves for older pitchers, and I think maybe partially because they're the healthy ones. The non-healthy ones got scrubbed out by 33, 34, a lot of them,
Yeah.
So if he's, one of the healthy ones, then, he's more akin to, and I'm not saying he is Max Scherzer or Justin Verlander, but like he's, if you're doing aging groupings, would you maybe put him more in that group than say a Jake DeGrom? Because Jake DeGrom can't stay healthy. So Gossman seems like you put him in the healthy older pitcher group, and it doesn't seem like the next 3 years are going to portend the end of his career,
Yeah.
Whereas for Jake DeGrom, the chance that the end of the next 3 years are the end of his career, they're not 0. They're not even 5 or 10%. It's probably something like 25%.
Yeah.
Am I wrong?
Yeah.
No.
So if you are thinking in these 3-year groups, you're not only thinking who's going to be good, but you're also thinking who's going to pitch in those 3 years, and who's going to pitch in those 3 years. And I think that's the toughest thing about pitchers. And this goes back to, this is a different topic, but this goes back to what you're saying about Josh Lowe. I really I did the control F on Jared Kelenic because I just saw some interesting analysis about how a lot of the things we loved about the beginning of the season for Jared Kelenic, when he's chasing less, making more contact.
Yeah.
All those things have just slowly over time regressed to where he was before.
Mm-hmm.
And I remember having one baseball person telling me that he actually thought that all that this year was for Jared Kelenic was just a reset. Like he just, went in with confidence, and that was different than what he was doing before, because now you look up and he's got the 33% K rate like he did last year. He's got the 14% swing strike rate like he did last year. And like almost everything is the same as last year, except he has a better BABIP, a worse barrel rate, and he started out better. So the shape of the season was like people remember that he was good, But if you do, I'm just going to do a simple split. I'm not saying this is predictive or anything, but he's hitting 178 in June.
Yeah,
If he hit
awful.
178 in March and April, all the people who did the victory laps on him, none of them would be here. No one of us would remember the victory laps on Jared Kelenic. Everyone would still remember, bust or whatever.
I decided with him, I made because I do my updates like monthly, and I decided to bring him up significantly, obviously, at the beginning of the season. But I decided not to touch him at all off of this, because you're definitely right, and things are turning in a bad direction.
When's your last update?
I just did the update. Literally just did. Oh, it was, what are we, May 9th or something?
So May 9th, you had Jared Kelenic around 140. And
yeah, around
sort of
150. Yeah, 140, 150. That's what put him in the range. You think of like, age, the age curve of like the adjustments he's making for power, for speed, his age still on that team. Yeah, there's a lot of positives why you could give him benefit of the doubt. So yeah, it's like right in the mid.
But you didn't push him as far as Josh Lowe.
No. And I but see, Josh Lowe has, even though you think he's tapered down a little bit in June, and the numbers are absolutely ridiculous, I kept Lowe going up, but not to extreme degrees. I wanted to just stop. And this is what I do. Like, I'm not, there are some people that are way more aggressive on stuff than I am. I want points before I make the big concerted decisions. And it's like, if this continues through June, because everything you said is right about Kelenic, I open up the opportunity too, that what if he is the streaky player? What if that will be his thing? What if All-Star break is another reset point? He gets back, he comes out, and he comes out the gates again. And it's just like Justin Upton all over again, where Justin Upton would have 2 crazy months and then be garbage and then kind of come back. that doesn't happen, then it's exactly what you said. It's like, oh, well, hilariously, the timing of his struggles just worked in his favor to go up, and I will probably bring him down significantly in the next update. Maybe that doesn't help for Forsythe for people, but I still think there's an opportunity that he sees it again,
just gets
and he
another good
readjusts.
stretch.
But it may not. But Josh Lowe and him are not in the same territory. Josh Lowe is absolutely moving into elite-ish territories that I think just takes a little bit more time to see. You know, and lots of these players. Nolan Gorman is struggling right now, but the adjustments he made, I thought, were insanely elite, and I think he deserves to not be punished because of 3 weeks right now. You know, I guess I was benefiting him from early.
I did see Nolan Gorman on a list that bothered me a little bit.
Which one?
Yeah, there's a lot of lists that could be worrisome here.
I wish I could give credit. Somebody had launch angle added. I think this sounds like an Alex Chamberlain thing, and he basically had because high pitches go for higher launch angles and low pitches go for lower launch angles. So he basically did like a pitch location adjusted launch angle, right? And Nolan Gorman was in like the top 3, which suggests that he has an uppercut swing.
Well, I also want to
suggest that he can be pitched to, that the strikeout rate is not, that the strikeout rate is related to the shape of his swing, which then puts him in sort of Kyle Schwarber territory. So if you're cool with Kyle Schwarber, and there are tons of reasons to be cool with him, OBP leagues, length of career, homers, this is Kyle Schwarber.
What I think is interesting about that is the preseason conversation where the Cardinals asked him to go and learn to hit high fastballs because he wasn't hitting high fastballs. And that was the work. And he had to go to, I think it was Driveline, and he made that adjustment. And a lot of the success early on was because that was how he was being attacked. So if you're talking about, high uppercut swings, he's being hit in the upper part of the zone and he's getting the ball in the air. If people are readjusting to him and he has retransformed his swing to be upper zone efficient, that if he's now being changed as far as how he's being pitched, he's got to learn to adjust that swing. Which
he may have made some advancements, but I'm looking at his heat map right now and he's blue across the top.
Yeah.
So, this is and if you remember, Schwarber's career early on, was tumultuous, and in fact, I think remains tumultuous. He has a 187 average right now, but last year he had 46 homers, right? So I think if you are considering Nolan Gorman and long term, you should definitely look at Kyle Schwarber's page.
That's interesting. It's really interesting.
You can see the similarities there for sure. I think it's interesting that Gorman, to this point in his career, looks like a better overall hitter than Kelenic does. And I wouldn't have expected that. I think the thing that's really tricked me with Jared Kelenic is the lower strikeout rates that he posted throughout his time in the minors. And the longer I do this, the longer I play, the more
this all the time.
The more I think it doesn't matter. Like I think just as people were obsessing over Ellie De La Cruz's high K rates in the minors being a problem, I think you can trick yourself into thinking that strikeouts aren't going to be a problem if you see a lot of sub 20% K rates, especially when it's really advanced age for level stuff like we've seen from Kelenic. And the more I see it, the more I think I know absolutely nothing about what a hitter is going to do with swing and miss based on what he did in the minors.
There are some organizations that don't game plan for the game the same way they do in the major leagues.
Look, what are they doing? What are they doing then? What is the point?
They focus more on what the hitters should do, and we're trying to get him to hit high fastballs, so we're not going to tell him to lay off high fastballs because he's in the minor leagues. We're working on high fastballs. So if he swings through a bunch of high fastballs, that's actually okay because it's a training environment right now for him to hit high fastballs, right? So I don't know. I just know these are separate things that I'm just now putting together in a way to sort of maybe explain why this happens, which is that I also know that like there are certain organizations where they get to the major leagues and they're surprised by how much data there is in the major leagues and how many scouting reports there are and how much they do. And you're like, that's not a good sign. When I hear
Oh,
you say something like that, I say, what are you guys doing in the minor leagues?
the amount of players. I don't want to cite it because I know
We
I've
just
said it
play
a
MLB
lot.
the show until it's game time.
Yeah, I've cited in different shows some players I've talked to and some of the things they've said that have astonished me. But yeah, I've never it's never gotten old to me of the players that I've talked to, and I'll bring up the word analytics or whatever it is, and they just I mean the very first one was like 5 years ago. I'll say his name, but it was Taylor Trammell, and when he was with the Reds, and I was just like, oh, what? Oh, are analytics a part of your game at this stage? And he shook his head in a way of like, let's not talk about this anymore. He's like, nope, 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 nope. And I was like, okay. And Alec Boehm told me he doesn't make in season in the minors. He would look at data in the off season, but he wouldn't make any adjustments or look at stuff in season in the minors. I'm gonna guess that probably
sometimes the coach is
changed.
doing that, right?
Yeah.
The coach is being a firewall and is like looking at those things for them,
Yeah.
and so they don't have to. I know that Bohm has a complicated relationship with analytics and stuff.
Yeah. Yeah.
I
Still
know
to this
that
day.
also he's been coached through that lens, so I don't know that he always knew it or.
It's just everyone would be shocked to what you're saying. It's like in the
Yeah.
lower levels to high A to even into double A, the amount of offhands organizations can have with guys, like what you're seeing in the stat lines are really just sometimes some of just the pure raw skill set, not like affirmative changes. The organizations like do this and do that and analyzing swings. They don't do that. That's not what's happening in those lower levels. Not saying everyone doesn't, but there's a decent
There's also
amount
just
that
like a
aren't.
difference. Like you're not trying to win the game as much. Like in the minor leagues, like what I'm saying with the high fastball thing. In the minor leagues, the point is to develop them. But I would argue that part of what you're developing is a process, and you want all of your minor leaguers to be used to the process of trying to win the day's game, right? So even if that game doesn't matter against the whatever's the lug nuts, you still want them to pretend it matters because when they get to the major leagues, you want them to be doing the same things and looking at the same numbers, looking at the video, doing the right things to put themselves in succeed.
You know what's
positions to succeed.
I can almost confirm. I don't want to say 100% because I paid attention to it, but it wasn't. I didn't like go up and grab people. But I've been going out to Arizona Complex League. I don't believe the complex in any way is utilizing like pitch clocks and stuff. Like these guys in rookie ball are not under. There's no clocks. There's no timing. I saw a guy yesterday get 3 timeouts to just kind of go back and forth and do stuff like that's a major league thing. And I know you're like a really long ways away and stuff, but they're not utilizing like the pace of the game and stuff in complex league. As far as I know, there's no clock. Maybe they're internally doing it, but it is slow paced, and it is so odd that that's not happening when that is literally the major league way right now. So just another thing.
I don't know why you wouldn't want to recreate as many. You can't recreate the entire problem set that is Major League Baseball. It's impossible. The talent's not there. But as far as the environment, you'd want to replicate that as much as you possibly could. In the process of preparing, you'd want to replicate that as much as you possibly could. And the reason some teams don't is money. Don't want to spend the money on the coaching and the tech. And
Maybe.
I don't know. I find that to be
There's
really
been
weird.
a recent expansion of teams that do, for example, what they call training dirty, which is Donnie Ecker called it when he came to San Francisco, which is, screw eye wash batting practice, where they're just flipping that up and everyone's hitting homers. Like that's not useful. More of a like, let's get in, let's have the machine throw the shapes that this starting pitcher is throwing tonight. Let's have the machine throwing at 100 miles an hour. Like let's get in there and get our eyes wide, before the game, and they're starting to do more of that at AAA so that when they call a guy up, he's just been doing that. And so he knows that they're doing it at the major league level. And so they're used to it, but they still probably don't do that at the complex.
Why? Yeah, why
And but
wouldn't
I
they?
have talked to some guys who in player development about this, and I think it's like comfort. And so there's 2 things you want to do for a prospect, or for your prospects in general when they're coming up, is you want to challenge them to make them improve, but you also want them to feel comfortable. And there's so much negativity failure, self-questioning that happens for a prospect coming up to the major leagues? Of course there is. Like, half of them don't make it. It's like Hunger Games or something where you're just seeing people drop out and just like, oh, did you hear? Blah blah blah. Retired or whatever. It's like, oh crap. He's younger than I am. Whatever. It's just like all these thoughts of like, I'm never gonna make it, or when am I gonna make it, and all this stuff. So a lot of organizations try to put. It's not. I'm putting air quotes on safe space, but like try to make them feel like they're in a space where everybody's rooting for them and that, everybody wants them to succeed. And you can see how that might be diametrically opposed to something like Training Dirty, where you're like, okay, now we're putting on the machine on 105.
Yeah.
And
I like
you're all
too,
going to look like idiots.
I do like the thought too. They're like, we want you to be comfortable, but talk about this when the 5 of you go share your 1-bedroom apartment while you're eating craft singles.
Right,
but feel comfortable in game while you guys are eating. I saw 2.
We're making our spreads better here. We know you're eating peanut butter and jelly.
Yeah, I won't say the team, but I was parked next to 2 guys as I was moving over to another field, and it was 2 players, and they were eating just bags of McDonald's. Not hating on McDonald's or anything, but they're just eating in their car. They're just wolfing down a bunch of McDonald's fries
cheap.
And stuff, and you're like,
Well, that's not the
baseball
best food
nutrition
for your next all-star.
Shout out to Kevin Maitan, who just got released. We'll always remember you.
Yeah, it's a shame. I mean,
Speaking
for him.
of McDonald's, yeah, it is.
Yeah.
Nice call.
So, how much of the rundown did we get to?
We got to the Dynasty
30%.
updates, which is impressive.
We did.
Yeah.
A couple quick updates on demoted players before we go. Grayson Rodriguez actually dealing at AAA, and it sounds like he made some adjustments. Did you say before the show that
he threw 2 cutters in his
cutters?
last start, so he is really putting the cutter away, which I think is a good idea. I think he should use it sometimes against lefties and not at all against righties. So that sounds like 2. I think he's doing that. Also, his command took a real jump forward in the last 2 games. So I'm hoping that the emphasis has been on fastball command, using the 4-seam against lefties, and finding his way out without the cutter. Because I don't think the cutter is a very good pitch, and he had 3 really good pitches before that. So I think there might be something really good happening under the hood there for Grayson.
Yeah, it looks like he's got 27 strikeouts against 8 walks in his last 3 starts. He's gone 6 innings every time out in June so far. So it might not be long before we see him back at the big league level. Jose Miranda has been stuck for a while. That's a big faller on the Dynasty rankings. Welsh, long-term outlook on Jose Miranda, how much has that changed given the way this season is playing out?
I mean, it's definitely changed because I think I felt a lot more hyper-aggressive into the preseason. The bat-to-ball skills, I think, was what I was betting on, that the homers were going to get there as well, and that just completely fell apart. It's kind of back to not being there. I mean, he's only hitting 252 in AAA. The strikeouts are lower, though. What's that?
The power's gone.
Yeah, well, it's the quality of contact is gone too. So I don't know what has happened, what the change is, but that was one that we had to move off of pretty quick because he didn't have the stolen bases to back him up. This seemed like a guy that would be a prime number 3 hitter, RBI opportunity type of guy that had 20 plus power, and the contact is completely gone. So I hope he can revamp it. I like him a lot.
There's a lesson for us, I guess. 109 Max EV did not suggest that he had plus raw power. That's basically just the tiniest bit above average, and a 6% barrel rate is not that great either. So the best thing he had going for him was that 19% strikeout rate, and that's still not like an Arisian number. That's more like he was slightly above average in K percentage, slightly above average in barrel rate, and just the tiniest ticks of above average in max EV. That's not actually, when you say it that way, it does not sound like an elite package you need to bet on, right?
Speaking of development lower, I'd like to see the Twin get him more aggressive. He's striking only 13% of the time. I don't want to see his strikeouts go up, but if he's walking a bit more, he's striking out less, and his batting average is down. Let's change something. Let's get him more aggressive. Let's have him swinging at more pitches and see what the I don't know. I would just
maybe
use
more
this as a
swings,
training ground.
Try to hit for power. See if that.
Yeah, that's what I'm saying. Screw the results right now. Let's get something fixed. Especially if where they counted him and moved him back. If you're also struggling in AAA, let's revamp some of this stuff. And who cares if we hit 220 for a period of time and the strikeouts go over 20%. Let's see what we can do with this. But I don't know what that looks like for them.
How about Vaughn Grissom so far at AAA? Just 2 homers in 46 games with Gwinnett, 7 for 9 as a base stealer. Slash line's not bad, 312, 380, 462. 13% K rate is nice to see. Is this a long-term profile to still be excited about, even though we don't know where exactly he's going to fit in defensively in Atlanta?
Excited might be a little bit too big of a term, but like I think we can still bank that there's something there.
Dude,
the batting
like
average
an exact
I'm in,
match for Miranda.
Are they?
Is it the same as far as
I mean,
lower
it's
barrel rate,
really
6.8% barrel rate?
simple. Like it's really similar. Like 18%, 19% strikeout rate, 6 to 7% barrel rate. His max EV is even lower. I mean, I think this is like someone you want to catch, at the right moment, but also not invest in heavily. You know what I'm saying? Like you could catch this guy and he could have a season like he did last year over a full season where he hits like 280, 290, 15-15 or 20-20. He could do that. But now it doesn't come at a middle infield position most likely. And there is a sort of whiff of like, well, he's slightly above average in a lot of places, but he's not really elite anywhere.
Steals bases, I'd say that, and I have on my Dynasty rank.
Miranda with stolen bases would also be better.
Yeah, and I have Grissom above Miranda in my Dynasty ranks, and at least the stolen bases, if anything, you've got on Grissom. And you do like to see the strikeout rate being cut, though.
The other player people were asking about is Alek Manoah. He's going to do another simulated game on Wednesday before eventually progressing to a regular rehab assignment. I kind of think we need to see some results in the minor leagues, see how things are going, get some reports on velo, get a sense for when the slider is back. It's too early to tell if anything has actually changed with him.
Yeah, I bet you they're attacking that slider movement though.
That's what I want to know though. I want to see give us something. Like, did we scrap a pitch? Did we change the shape? What are we doing? If they solely worked on pace, his pacing of pitching with the clock, I would love to know what those things are. So I just had to kind of move him down, and we got to sit and wait. You could argue he's a buy now because of track record and age. I probably wouldn't disagree with you too much, but he's also a major flight risk right now.
This is a weird thought I had. Do you think if he does, let's say his slider movement profile is improving in the training sessions, do you think it might be a good idea to like leak that?
Well,
yes.
That's the thing. The reports that came out, I think it was John Schneider talking to the media and saying, "Oh, there have been positive reports from Florida. Oh, yes, your people told you that things are looking good, so you could leak that on MLB Network Radio." But the data's a little bit
different, where you sort of like you leak that to some journalist, and they're like, "Oh, his horizontal movement on sliders up 4 inches." I mean, that would create a positive like narrative in the media where people are like, "Ooh, oh, is slide," and then like a nicer landing point for Manoah, right? Like, oh,
they need like a driveline slow mo video of him.
Exactly,
classic. That is 100% what they need.
They need to build him up. Like they need to build his confidence back up. That guy was done. Like you need to. Yeah, you need to have like a hype video, a training video.
Yeah,
like
music is to it.
Leaks, or just even publish it. Each of these players, each of these organizations usually has. I don't know if the Toronto does this, but you've noticed this where they have player development Twitter accounts.
Yes, 100%. They need to hire the WWE and do a promo video. And it's like Alek Manoah music. I completely
plus 3.5 inches horizontal movement.
Closer videos. So the good folks that make the closer entrance videos in the off season could make
some
rehab videos, like hype videos for your rehabbing players.
Yeah, I agree.
I
love that.
That's where we're headed. All right, we are going to call it a show. If you enjoyed this one, take a moment, hit the like button. If you're watching us on YouTube, leave us a nice review on Apple Podcasts or Spotify. We'd greatly appreciate that. And subscribe to the channel on YouTube if you haven't done that already. If you got questions for a future episode, ratesandbarrels@gmail.com is the best way to send those in. You could also drop those under this video on YouTube. We try to check that every once in a while as well. On Twitter, you can find Welsh at @IsItTheWelsh. You can find Eno at @EnoSaris. You can find me at Derek Van Riper. That's going to do it for this episode of Rates and Barrels. We are back with you on Wednesday.
Thanks for listening.